In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. Go ye therefore into all the world and preach the gospel. Jesus spoke, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. Taking the light to the nations. Light of the Southwest.
Well, Jeff and I want to welcome you to this.
Hello, Al. How are you doing?
Who's Al?
Yeah.
And glad that you're here with us today.
Glad that you can join us on Light of the Southwest today.
Right. What do we got going on?
Well, we've got a pretty good program. We've got a couple old friends back in town. We have Keith Johnson and Nehemia Gordon. Gentlemen,
Shalom.
welcome back to GLC.
It's exciting
Thanks
to
for
be
having us
back.
back.
You've been busy, I'm guessing. You've
yeah.
been here before.
Yep.
Now, we'll catch the viewers up a little bit. You were here. I don't even remember when
It was
that
in
was.
August.
Was that long?
Yeah, last August.
That was a long time
and we were
ago.
here talking about our book, A Prayer to Our Father. That's a book that we wrote together on the Hebrew origins of the Lord's Prayer. And Keith is a Christian pastor. I'm a Jew, a Jewish Bible scholar from Israel, and we got together and we did this research on the Hebrew background and origins of the Lord's Prayer. And when we were here last, we were about to head out on a speaking tour, and we actually made an incredible decision about what we were going to do. We decided that we were going to essentially go anywhere where we were called to go.
Or I should say anywhere we were invited to go.
Invited to go.
Exactly. And we ended up going to some amazing places. Yeah. And
Aren't you from North Carolina or somewhere?
he's from North Carolina.
That's it. Okay.
I was born and raised in Chicago, but I've lived in Jerusalem, Israel since 1993.
Really?
And I studied there at the Hebrew University. And so I was actually approaching the Lord's Prayer, and specifically the Hebrew origins of the Lord's Prayer, from a textual perspective, just as a Jewish Bible scholar. And I ended up having a relationship with Keith Johnson over studying the Old Testament. And at a certain point, we decided that we would also look at the New Testament together, looking at the Hebrew backgrounds and origins of it. And we found some incredible things digging into the Hebrew background. The prayer this ancient Jewish prayer just comes to life.
And why not?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's all this richness in the prayer that you don't see when you read it in English, and when you look at the Hebrew and Jewish context of it, that just comes to the forefront.
Yeah.
So.
I can see why God put you into that.
Well, it certainly wasn't a place I expected to be called. Me as a Jewish Bible scholar, and I'm Jewish and not Messianic. So, the last place I expected to be would be studying the Lord's Prayer in Hebrew and understanding the Hebrew and Jewish background, working with this guy, a Christian pastor, trained in a seminary.
Fire-breathing Southern preacher.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
We have really very different styles and backgrounds and training.
At least you speak to each other and you love each other. That's what,
That's
what
true.
the whole thing's supposed to be.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, the last time you were on, I cannot believe that's been
9 months.
9 months.
You could
I
make a
cannot
human
believe
life in 9 months, a baby.
You can. But we talked a lot about that the last time, about your book, and how your experience of traveling around and checking out all the places and everything. Did we show a picture of your book? Because the book is still available, is it not?
Yeah, it's not only available, but the first printing sold out, and now we're in the second printing. It recently came out, and the second printing has something that the first one didn't, which is a CD that comes in the back of the book, and it has a recording of the Lord's Prayer. A recording of the Lord's Prayer in both Hebrew and English. Keith is reciting it with some beautiful musical accompaniment, and I believe they have the video here.
Billions of people around the world consider what is commonly known as the Lord's Prayer as the ultimate expression of their faith. This prayer has been translated into over 1,400 languages. It was originally taught in Hebrew to the Jewish multitudes who came to hear Yeshua preach on a windswept Galilean mountainside. Let's take a trip back in time and listen to this prayer in its original language and context.
אני רוצה לאכול משהו עכשיו.
וכן תתפללו. אבינו שבשמיים, יתקדש שמך, ויתברך מלכותך, רצונך יהיה עשוי בשמיים ובארץ, ותיתן לחמנו תמידית, ומחול לנו חטאותינו כאשר אנחנו מוחלים לחוטאים לנו, ואל תביאנו לידי ניסיון, ושומרנו מכל רע. Amen. Amen. Our Father in heaven, may your name be sanctified. May your kingdom be blessed. Your will shall be done in heaven and on earth. Give us our bread continually, daily. Forgive us the debt of our sins as we forgive the debt of those who sin against us. Do not bring us into the hands of a test, and protect us from all evil. Amen.
That's pretty good.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
all I can say.
Yeah.
Wow.
I tell you, I have to just say, it's been so exciting to actually bring the prayer to life. You know, I was in study with Nehemia for the last 6 or 7 years, and then when we did the book, you know, we knew that the book had great information, but the idea of being able to put the prayer in the back of the book, we have people literally around the world that are now learning the prayer and speaking the prayer and praying the prayer, and so it really has been exciting for us to add that aspect.
That's in the back of the book.
Yeah, it comes actually in the back of the book now in the second edition, inserted, and they get the CD. It has an audio recording of essentially the same information as well as that video. So they get both of those with the book now in the second edition. So, you know, one of the things that coming at this whole topic as a Jew, that I've actually been heavily criticized by many of my Jewish brothers and sisters.
I was going to say, you must have caught it.
As you might imagine. And, you know, I realized I was last year speaking in Seattle where my sister lives. And my sister's a very educated woman. She actually runs a lab at the University of Washington where she's a professor. But like myself, she was raised as an Orthodox Jew, doesn't know the first thing about Christianity, probably couldn't name for you one or two of the disciples. You know, she really knows nothing about Christianity. So during my presentation, she was there, and I thought I'd do an experiment and see, does my sister know the Lord's Prayer? Because what I found is that everybody knows this prayer. It's so widely known. And so I asked her to stand up in the middle of the presentation. I say, Sharona, can you recite for us the Lord's Prayer? And she was able to do it. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. It's about as far as she got. And I thought, okay, I've proven my point. I was ready to go on. And then she interrupts me and she says, Nehemia, I know another prayer. And I thought, well, what's this other prayer? And she starts to recite, "Hail Mary, full of grace, blessed art thou among women, blessed is the fruit of thy womb." And I thought, wow, didn't see that one coming. But she said she knew that prayer from the movie The Godfather, when Frankie is sitting on the boat in Lake Tahoe just before he's killed by his brother. And but it made me think that Jesus didn't teach that prayer. And not just because that's a Catholic prayer, he could have taught a prayer that would be unique to the Christian faith, that only a Christian could pray. But it made me realize, my sister, saying those two different prayers side by side, that the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father prayer, is a prayer that any Jew could pray. And I think that's one of the brilliant things about this prayer. And not only any Jew, any human being in our humanity can turn to God as Father in heaven and pray this prayer. And I think that's a really powerful thing. So to my Jewish brothers and sisters who are criticizing me for talking about the Lord's Prayer and showing that there's such beauty in it and so much meaning when you look at the Hebrew background of it, I would challenge them to show me a single word in the prayer, a single concept that's inconsistent with the Jewish faith, whatever version of the Jewish faith you have. Yeah. And you actually, Jeff, made an interesting remark last time on our way back to the hotel. I don't know if you remember this. After we had done the interview, you remarked to us that we had managed to encapsulate the entire Bible in the Lord's Prayer. And my response was that we didn't do it, Yeshua did it. And what we were doing was showing that once you understand the Hebrew background, that essentially he's encapsulating all these different concepts in that prayer.
Yeah. Wow.
Question.
Yes.
Where you say the Lord's Prayer, what is the word in Hebrew for Lord right there?
So Lord's Prayer is actually the English name of the prayer. In Hebrew, it wouldn't really be called, in ancient Hebrew especially, it wouldn't be called the Lord's Prayer. In Hebrew, you would name anything after the opening words. So like the first book of the Bible is called Bereshit, in the beginning after the opening word. This prayer would be called Avinu, which is Our Father, the Our Father prayer, the Avinu prayer. And that's actually what you find it in most languages. In most languages, it's called the Our Father. And if you say to people, I actually have a friend from who speaks Dutch, and I said to him, I'm working on the Lord's Prayer. He said, "What's that?" And he's a Christian. And I said, "Well, you don't know this? You're a Christian. How do you not know the Lord's Prayer? Our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name." He said, "Oh, the Our Father prayer." Because in most languages, that's what they know it as.
So it's only in English that it's called the
It's not only in
Lord's
English,
Prayer.
but in English, it's most widely known as the Lord's Prayer. If some English speakers do know it as the Our Father prayer. If you think about it, you've heard that occasionally, the Our Father prayer.
Yeah.
But in English, it's predominantly known as the Lord's Prayer. In most other languages, it's predominantly known as the Our Father prayer.
Well, Nehemia, let me kind of derail this just a little bit.
Sure.
You had just said that Jesus, Yeshua, had never... Did you say that he never made a prayer that...
Well, this is actually the only prayer that he taught. If you look at the Gospels, he prayed certain prayers in his own life. But the only prayer, when they said, "How do we pray?" this is the only prayer he taught. And it's a prayer that any Jew could pray and any human being could pray. And that I think is, that's amazing if you think about it. Because he could have taught something that would be really unique to Christianity, and he didn't do that.
And he never did that. Is that correct? And you know
the only
that
prayer he taught, and you could look at the prayer yourself. There's nothing in the prayer contrary to Judaism. And that's a really interesting point we bring out in the book, that so many Christian theologians will say that when he taught the Jews to pray to God as Father, that was scandalous. But in fact, you find God being referred to as Father throughout ancient Jewish sources and throughout the Old Testament as well.
By name, in fact, correct.
Right. Oh, the phrase "Our Father" actually appears in Isaiah. It's not something that Yeshua made up.
Yeah.
He was teaching the people something that when he said these things, they said, "Oh yeah, we were supposed to know that. How come we haven't been doing this?"
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating that he never taught anything that could have been construed as creating a new religion.
Well, certainly for prayer, let's be specific, because that's the context that we're talking here. Is when it comes to the prayer, the only prayer he taught, and we actually realized that when we were at a monastery, a Catholic monastery, and they had a statement there, "This is the only prayer that our Savior ever taught." And Keith and I looked at each other and we're like, "Wait a minute, that's right." And we went through all the Gospels, and we found the only prayer in the New Testament that Jesus taught was that prayer, the Our Father, the Lord's Prayer.
Wow. You didn't know that either, Keith, as a Christian.
There's so many things. I have to tell you all, this has been a humbling experience for me. We have been in this process of learning for, like I said, 6 to 8 years, I guess. From the first time that I met Nehemia, we talked about that a little bit last time. But then this idea of being able to go out amongst people, Christian people, Torah observant people, different denominations of people, and actually to go out with my friend Nehemia. And it has been an amazing experience. I mean, literally, we've been amongst people that are as far in their beliefs from a Seventh-day Adventist church to a Torah observant church, from a gospel-believing, Holy Spirit-speaking congregation to a symposium on the Hebrew roots of our faith. So it has been like a really amazing thing. And so for me, the reason I've been so excited about coming back here is that Al really kind of told us what we were about to get into. And it's not that I didn't believe you, Al, but I just have to come back and tell you thank you.
What did I tell you?
You said there's a lot of differences out there amongst the people. And so we've gone out there, and it's been a blast to be with Nehemia. There's been some things that have happened that have been exciting and also some challenges. So for me, I've just been really encouraged about what we've been doing.
Yeah, we were actually at a Baptist church. We did a 3-day conference at a Baptist church.
Was it a primitive Baptist church?
Oh, no, this is I'm not sure exactly what that means, but this was a pretty conservative Baptist church, having us speak for 4 sessions, essentially, over a 3-day period on the Hebrew origins of the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah.
And the first 3 sessions we did jointly. The 4th session was Sunday morning, and Keith was giving a sermon, and I wasn't really invited to that because, you know, I'm the Jew. I'm not coming to the surface. They didn't want me. After this,
Really?
I'm telling you, after the second session.
I was right, wasn't I?
Well, but listen to this. After the second session, on the second of the 3 that I was doing jointly with Keith, the head pastor comes up to me and he said, "Would you open up tomorrow morning with prayer in Hebrew at our Sunday morning service?"
Yeah.
You got the vision.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, it's the first time I've ever prayed in a church. I've never prayed in a church before, but I got up there in front of the congregation and I offered a prayer in Hebrew, and it was a prayer that was entirely nothing in it that was contrary to Christianity or contrary to Judaism. It's something that we have in common. This book this is the Tanakh, what Christians call the Old Testament. We have that's a large section of everyone's Bible, of Christians' Bible as well. The New Testament's a relatively thin book, and so I prayed there in Hebrew, and it was perfectly accepted there by the Baptist church. And I got to tell you, I never saw myself standing up in a Baptist church praying, and especially during the Sunday morning service.
Now, I don't mind telling you, too, I saw it. I thought it would happen eventually from the time that I met him in Jerusalem. I really believed that he and I were called into a relationship, one for each other. But I want to say this. I really believe that our relationship is also a picture and a gift to believers that are out there.
What's getting ready to happen.
Exactly. So I know you're going to understand that. So for me, one of the things that I've been doing is sort of shifting a little bit too. I've gone into churches, and there's one thing I love to do, and I'd like to actually do it here if I could. I don't know if this will work on camera or not, but I've been traveling around with Nehemia in airports all over the country, now even in different parts of the world, which we'll talk about later. And one of the things I do is I walk around the airports carrying this with me. And so I usually walk around in the airport like this, Al, and I've got this with me. And
oh my God, it's a gun.
Yeah, exactly. So what'll happen is I'll go through the airport, and this will go through the X-ray. And literally 50% of the time, somebody will stop me and say, "What is that?" So one of the times I love to talk about is Nehemia and I are traveling somewhere. We're traveling out to the West Coast, and it goes to the TSA, and a lady, calls the supervisor. And so she says, "Supervisor." And so the supervisor comes over, and I guess he wasn't in a real patient mood, and neither was I. So he grabs it just like this, and he holds it out in front of me, and he says, "Well?" And I say, "It's the horn of God." And he says, "You mean like the one they blew around the walls of Jericho?"
Did he really?
And I said, "Absolutely." And he goes, "Something's rising up in me right now." So one of the things I've been doing is I've actually taken this, and I'm sure the folks that are listening and watching know what this is. This is a shofar. And so one of the things I've been doing in all of the places that we've gone, as my friend Nehemia goes out and speaks or prays and reads, and I'm out there doing what we're doing, we're always trying to find some commonality. So one of the things I've done is I've actually blown the shofar as a picture of what happened in Jerusalem, and I think a picture of what we're being called to now. I am so glad we're on this set. And can I tell you why? Because behind us is the world. And I believe what we're doing right now literally is a message for the world. And we're going to talk about later where we've been invited internationally, Canada, Mexico, and most excitingly, recently, to South Africa. And actually, this particular shofar comes from South Africa. You all,
No kidding.
Absolutely. It's from a kudu. And so I could put it on, it's a horn,
But I've never seen a shofar with one.
Well, would it be okay for me as a picture to blow this shofar? Could we do that on camera?
I think God would allow it.
Absolutely. Let's do that.
Should I back up?
Oh,
You might want to.
there's no ammunition in here, at least physically.
What was that a call to?
I call it a call to action. I think one of the things that we're doing with this prayer is literally calling people to action. The message of Yeshua, some people call him Jesus. What I love so much about his message is he's constantly calling people to action. The Hebrew language is an action-oriented language, and it's been a blessing for me to actually learn what I call my most prized possession, which is my Bible. It's been my most prized possession my whole life. And to be able to understand, and this is a little embarrassing, for a while I actually thought that the original language of my Bible was King James. I mean, I watched the Ten Commandments and I heard God speaking. I was convinced that that was the language that God chose. And come to find out, he had a completely different language. And what's even been more controversial is to realize that as I learned the original language of that major part of my Bible, which is the Tanakh, the Old Testament, there are some times when in English you just can't communicate the same thing from Hebrew to English. And so it's been a blessing to be in relationship with this guy. He's a great guy to travel with. I'm on TV, so I'd like to tell you at least one funny story before we get so serious about this prayer. Can I just tell you one funny story? So we're invited to Canada, and we're up in Canada, and every morning Nehemia loves to eat breakfast. And so he was on a different schedule than me. We're in Canada. Now, they put us in the same room. So we're sleeping in the same room, and sometimes that causes a little bit of problem. Sometimes he ends up with my socks, and I end with his socks. But in this particular time, he said, listen, we're in Canada. I'm going to go out and get us some breakfast. Now, on that particular day, Canada was celebrating some sort of a holiday, family day or something. And all the stores were closed. So I wake up in the morning, and my friend Nehemia has gone out to get us breakfast. 20 minutes pass, 45 minutes pass. An hour passes, and at this point, I'm getting nervous, thinking, Nehemia, we're in Canada, where are you? An hour and a half passes, and now I want to call somebody. All of a sudden, Nehemia comes in the door, and he's got all of this fruit for me. And I mean, my heart was softened. My friend Nehemia has gone out and gotten me this fruit. So he lays out all the fruit, and I'm starting to eat the fruit, and I said, Nehemia, aren't you going to eat some of the fruit with me? Well, I already ate. What do you mean you already ate? He crossed the border into the United States because there was nothing open. There was nothing open in the community. And while he was over there, he saw a Denny's, and he said he was cold. And so he stopped in the Denny's and had a full big slam breakfast without me. But the reason I tell that story is we've been traveling, you guys, literally around the country.
Since you were here?
Since we've been here.
Oh, yeah.
And it's been an absolute blast, and the stories that we have are...
We've spoken in 5 countries since we were here.
Yeah, 5 countries.
Wow.
We've
All over the U.S. We've been Canada, Mexico, Israel, of course, speaking there, and South Africa most recently.
For us, I didn't understand, why weren't they serving food in Canada?
It was some Canadian holiday I've never heard of called Family Day, and nothing was open. So I went to the...
You'd think it was Shabbat.
You would think, yeah. So I went to the front desk and I said, well, nothing's open. How far is the U.S. border? They said, oh, it's only 5 minutes away. Turns out that's 5 minutes by car. So
you walked.
This was in February when it's snowing and cold and there's ice on the sidewalks. I walked to Canada. I walked to the United States. Once I get to the U.S. across the border, then I'm looking, of course, for a place to buy some stuff, and that took me another half an hour. And by the time I got back, I think it was probably nearly 2.5 hours.
Yeah, it was a long time.
And my hands were frozen. So as I'm getting to the U.S. border, I see the Denny's, and I'm like, well, I'm sorry, Keith. I
got to go get that ham and eggs.
Well, no, all kosher.
No, but I'll tell you another example of something that happened, and this really, I think, is more of a picture of some of what you were telling us before we went, and some of what I believe that is happening. Nehemia, not only does he love to eat breakfast, but he's not so good with geography. So I agreed to go with him wherever he wanted to go on the tour that we went to. And so he set the itinerary where we would go. So literally, we were in Canada. We were on the West Coast. We end up in the East Coast. We're back on the West Coast. Then we're back on the East Coast. And I'm thinking, I'm never going to let him set the itinerary again. But one of the places that he set us up in, and I'm sure he didn't know where we were going, is a place called Waynesville, Georgia. Have you ever been to Waynesville, Georgia?
I'm not even sure I've ever been to Georgia, honestly.
Well, if you know anything about Waynesville, Georgia, it's a lovely place. We really enjoyed our time there. But when we traveled to Waynesville, Georgia, our host sat us down for dinner. And before we went to the meeting, he says, well, I just want to tell you something, y'all. Last week, we had a KKK meeting in Waynesville, Georgia. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, that's a problem. He said, well, the good news is there weren't a whole lot of people there. And I thought, a whole lot? If there's one person, that's a problem for me. Now, Nehemia at this point is a little nervous because he realizes, okay, if it was a KKK meeting, not only have they may be focusing on me, he as a Jew would also be in the mix.
In the crosshairs.
So here's what happens. We get to Waynesville, Georgia, to this fellowship. The first guy that I meet comes up to me and says, hey, how you doing? You want to see my gun? I got a .357 Magnum. Fire shoots out the side. Let's go out back. I'm going to show you my gun. Now, Tom, I'm just...
Wait.
No, listen. True story. No, this happens. This happens. So the guy he says, do you want to go out back and see my gun? And I'm thinking, absolutely not. So at this point, I call my wife. I say, Andrea, she's my lovely wife. Wife and 3 boys. I call my wife. I say, Andrea, Nehemia has me in Waynesville, Georgia, and there's a guy here who wants to show me his gun. She says, well, at least they can get 2 for 1. So at this point, I'm thinking, I'm really not happy. But here's why I tell you the testimony. I'm standing up in front of this lovely group of people in Waynesville, Georgia, and I asked somebody if they would read from the Bible. And so the guy who asked me if I wanted to see his gun...
You didn't go around the back of church, did you?
I didn't go around the back. He stands up and he reads, and I'm asking him to read the Shema in Deuteronomy. He opens up Deuteronomy and he says, Shema Yisrael, and in the middle of the verse, he starts to cry. As he starts to cry, my heart is melted. Because what I realized was I really did make a judgment. And I think I had good reason to make a judgment. This guy doesn't look like me. He doesn't talk like me. He doesn't act like me. But I'm convinced of something. He and I have some of the same internal. He loves the Word. I love the Word. Now, a month later, they invited me back to Waynesville, Georgia by myself. And I went happily. Now, what was interesting is my wife didn't come with me. But I went happily back to Waynesville, Georgia. And when I got there, my friend Richard handed me this. He said, Keith, I made these for you. Multicolored seats. And what he said is they were the picture of the colors of the temple, and they were multicolored. In every single place I go, I always bring these with me as a picture of not only what God is doing, but what he has done and what he will do. And what I love about this also, it reminds me not to make judgments based on external, but rather to find out what's going on internally. And I want to say to my friends in Waynesville, Georgia, I will go back there tomorrow and visit them. Those folks love God with their heart, soul, and mind, and they love people.
Did you ever see Skeeter's .357?
Absolutely, I did, and I have a picture of it. Won't show it here. At the end of the service, he actually let me hold the .357. Now I say, I held the .357. The next time I went back, we actually went out back and shot the .357. So I would just say it's been a blessing.
Did you say went out back and shot it?
It's Georgia, come on.
That's worse than Texas.
Yeah. You're not supposed to be in front of the church.
Yeah. So we really have had some great times, and we've also had some challenges. And you told us, Al, you told us that we were going to have some challenges, and you took us out to dinner. I don't know if you remember. You took us to dinner, and you bought us a wonderful dinner after our last time, and you said, now, guys, I just want to know, I want to tell you something. There's going to be some challenges. And I have to say I'm a little embarrassed by some of the challenges that we've had, especially as it pertains to how people have treated my Jewish brother. And so...
Good or bad?
I'm going to call it creative tension.
Well, I mean, there was definitely, we had some great experiences. Like I said, we've been all over the place. Most of the experiences we've had have been good. I actually opened up in prayer at the National Prayer Day at the state capitol in Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And they told me afterwards I was the first Jew ever to pray a National Prayer Day in Pennsylvania. So, you know, most of the experiences we've had, I have to say, have been good. But
you see, that's a sign of what's getting ready to happen. That Messiah is going to come back.
Well,
or come, whichever way you want to put
I'll
it.
accept that one. Amen, hallelujah.
Amen.
I know he's going to come.
What's the National Day of Prayer in Pennsylvania?
Oh, it's something that they do all around the United States, National Prayer Day. It's something that actually, usually the president is involved in. And I think this year, actually, Barack Obama issued a proclamation calling upon people all over the country to pray. And it's something they have in every state capital and all kinds of other places with community leaders. And generally, it's considered a Christian event. And I was invited to participate in that in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and offer a prayer in Hebrew and another prayer, and continue in English. And so I recited the Lord's Prayer in Hebrew and English, then offered a prayer, praying for the peace of Jerusalem and for the peace of the United States. And there was nothing in my prayer again that was contrary to Christianity or contrary to Judaism. It's what we have in common. We worship the same God, and we can both pray to Him. So most of the experiences have been very positive. Some of them haven't been, and I have to say it's from both the Jewish side and from the Christian side that I think particularly myself has received a lot of flack. One of the things that was out there is this rumor that was being spread around, especially in the Hebrew roots community, that I was grabbing people and convincing them and forcing them to give up Jesus, which is just beyond my comprehension that I would do such a thing like that, because my belief is that only God can change someone's faith. And I, as a textual scholar, that's beyond my purview, beyond my mandate as a textual scholar. What I can do is look at a text and see what it says and understand it in its original context. But as far as belief, that's a matter of personal faith. That's not something that I would ever do. So the rumor itself was on its face ludicrous, but once these rumors are out there, people start to believe them. And I think the reason for a rumor like that is they can't understand, what am I doing here? Why am I out here going around the world talking about Jesus and things that He taught, and I'm not slamming Him? They can't understand that, so I must have some secret hidden agenda. Well, I got the same thing from the Jewish side, but there the criticism was the exact opposite, that I'm actually a covert Christian missionary to convince people to believe in Jesus, and that's why I'm saying these positive things about Jesus. And it's kind of ironic because the two rumors they cancel each other out. So I actually put out this letter trying to explain to people.
I know he's going to explain this, but let me just say something. If it's his job to do converting, he hasn't done so well with me. We've been together for 8 years. I don't think he's such a great evangelist.
It's the 10 years. It's the 10-year plan. I'm going to spring it on him after 10 years. So I actually put out a letter trying to explain to people what I was doing, and I think most people received it. And I called it The Ass Speaks Out. Mm-hmm. And I was referring to Balaam's ass. Mm-hmm. And the reason I called it that is something that happened to me in one of my travels around the U.S. A gentleman walked up to me and he said, I almost didn't come to hear your presentation because my congregation leader told me it was absolutely forbidden. You cannot go hear that Jew speak. He's not a believer and not anointed to speak the truth. And this is what his congregation leader told him. And he responded to his congregation.
You didn't go to a mosque, did you?
No, I've actually never been to a mosque yet, although I'm open to go anywhere.
That sounded like a mosque, like the local imam.
I'm open to go. This was a Christian pastor who had said this. Oh. I'm open to go anywhere I'm called. So I'm open to go anywhere I'm called, even a mosque, but I have not been to a mosque yet. In any event, because I think they need to hear this message as well in a mosque. I think maybe there more than anywhere else they need to hear it. So this man responded to his pastor. He was telling me this. He said to him, if God could use Balaam's ass to speak the truth, surely He can use Nehemia as well. And I think that was a very interesting image, and I didn't entirely appreciate being compared to Balaam's ass. But I think the point there is that God can use anybody, and it was a profound statement to some respects, because we have these preconceptions of, we're supposed to listen to this person or that person. And I got to say, I think in Christianity they have that more than in Judaism. Yeah. In Judaism, we actually have a tradition, a cultural tradition, that if people disagree, you can still listen to what the other guy has to say. This idea that this is my denomination and I can't listen to anybody outside of it, that's certainly not a Jewish idea. Maimonides was famous for having said, accept the truth from whoever speaks it. And the ancient rabbinical sages, they said, who is a wise man? He who learns from any man. And so in Judaism, I think there's more of an openness, especially when it comes to ideas that don't necessarily have a practical expression, meaning, you know, if beliefs and they're much more open to that, I think, than at least in certain Christian circles, I should say. Others are open.
Can I bring the controversy now? Can I bring the controversy on GLC? Here's the thing that I really think is happening here. My friend Nehemia obviously is Jewish. He's not Messianic. He's in his process, and whatever that process is, God is the one who's the great maestro and the orchestrator. As I am in a process, he and I both are in a process. But one of the things that I think that's happening is that, you know, back in the day, we had a wonderful church father, they say a wonderful church father, the Protestant movement, called Martin Luther. And Martin Luther, at one point, loved the Jews.
He did.
He thought the Jews were going to be converted and they were going to be able to make wonderful change and, who knows, bring in the Messianic reign. And then all of a sudden he ran into the fact that the Jews were not being converted based on the information that he was giving. So he went from loving the Jews to all of a sudden hating the Jews. And you all know about that things that he wrote, The Jews and Their Lies. What I really think is happening right now amongst a lot of people is that the spirit of Martin Luther is existing.
Oh, it never did go away.
It never did go away. And the problem with it is that at one point we say, love Israel, love the Jews, as long as we think we can convert them. But what if we can't do that? All of a sudden we have one that comes legitimately, who comes.
I'm sorry, Keith. The spirit of Martin Luther, what do you mean by that?
Well, one of the things that we have to understand historically is, okay, Martin Luther was a Protestant reformer, and we're appreciative for that. But the other thing about him is that he absolutely, at one point, loved the Jews. He thought that he had a message that was going to literally convert the Jews. And after it was unsuccessful, then what his love for the Jews turned into was an actual hate for the Jews. And he wrote many things. One of the things he wrote was The Jews and Their Lies. If you ever get a chance to take a look at it, it's actually a bit embarrassing in terms of the anti-Semitism that exists. But what I think is happening is that we have people that are in these fellowships that would look at a Nehemia and say, okay, we love Israel. We love the Jews as long as we think we can convert them. So all of a sudden you have a legitimate, authentic Jewish man who comes and says, I'd love to come into your fellowship and share truth with you, in fact, about a message and a person that you absolutely want to hear from.
Did you know that spirit's still alive? Most of the people who go to Israel with it, they have one thing in mind. I am going to convert a Jew. Really? That was our 25th trip. And it has changed after I learned what replacement theology was.
Yeah.
Shut your mouth.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting. One of the struggles that I end up having is that people will say, well, now, Keith, why are you spending so much time with this Jewish guy? I mean, are you not doing your job? Is he not converted yet? So it's been a little interesting with me. In fact, we have some other fellowships that actually will invite him, but they won't invite me. And the reason they won't invite me is they put me in a nice little box. You know, I'm the United Methodist pastor who, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been a wonderful challenge.
I'm somehow less threatening because I'm a Jew and I'm outside of their, I'm not threatening to them because I'm not within the denominational system, but he's a competing denomination. They can't have him.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
One of the things that I tried to explain to people about why I do this is really an experience I had many years ago in Israel. And, I live in Jerusalem, lived there since '93, and I meet such interesting people there. You meet the most interesting people in Jerusalem. Well, quite a while ago, must have been over 10 years. Wow, it must have been over 15 years ago. I met a very interesting American gentleman who was a tourist who was coming over, and he described himself as a Messianic Gentile. And I had no idea what that was. I'd never met anyone quite like that. And so, he piqued my curiosity.
Contradictory.
Yeah, I'm not getting that
Well, this was his term. I didn't, define him.
Yeah.
I like to let people define themselves. And so he explained that he really came out of the whole "What would Jesus do" movement. He was very serious about that. What would Jesus do? And one day he was sitting eating a BLT, bacon, lettuce, and tomato burger, and he
Bacon
in the
fruit.
middle of a bite, he starts to think, what would Jesus do? Wait, Jesus wouldn't be eating this BLT. And Jesus wouldn't be doing a lot of the things that this gentleman was doing as a Christian. And he felt that he wanted to live his life the way Jesus lived his life, going to the synagogue and doing various other things. And the way he expressed that was, he said, well, Jesus was a Jew, and he started to look at Judaism. And as he's explaining this to me, he tells me that one of the things that he was actually part of a Messianic congregation over here in the United States. And he told me that in this Messianic congregation, one of the things they do is they recite Jewish prayers. And one of those prayers, he was very proud of this, is the Amidah. Now, I knew what that prayer was. I grew up with that prayer as an Orthodox Jew, praying that prayer 3 times a day. It's a standard Orthodox Jewish prayer. But I was shocked when he told me they were praying the Amidah in his congregation. The reason I was so shocked is I knew something he obviously didn't know. Now, the Amidah is also called the Shemona Esrei, or the 18 benedictions. But what I knew that he didn't is it actually has 19 benedictions. And the 19th benediction was added around the year 90. The Talmud tells us this. And it was added actually as a curse of the Jewish followers of Jesus, Jewish followers of Yeshua.
A curse upon them?
A curse upon them. Because they were participating in the Jewish synagogues, and the rabbis wanted them out. And the rabbis didn't have the authority to say, oh, you guys get out. And they didn't always know who they were. But they said, if we proclaim a public curse upon them, they'll stop coming. And it was pretty effective. That's part of the standard prayer book to this day for Orthodox Jews. Not all Jews pray that prayer. And I think most Orthodox Jews don't necessarily know what it means. But if you look at the history of it, even in the Jewish Encyclopedia, it tells you that's where it comes from. So this Messianic Gentile I meet in Jerusalem is telling me his congregation is praying the Amidah, and I'm thinking, surely you mean without the curse upon the Jewish followers of Yeshua. Like, I'm thinking, no, he can't mean that. And he shows me his prayer book, and there it is in the prayer book. And they had no idea what the origins of that prayer was. And it uses certain coded terms because Jews lived in Christian countries. They couldn't very well, in Christian countries, curse Jewish followers of Jesus, because that would get them killed. So in Europe especially, the prayer was kind of modified to use euphemisms and certain terms that you had to be a Jew to know what that meant. And so these people had adopted that prayer not knowing what it meant. And it broke my heart. It really broke my heart. I was in tears when he told me, because I was imagining an entire congregation of people who love God as much as I love God, who love the Hebrew Scriptures as much as I love the Hebrew Scriptures. And although we had these big differences, I respected their walk, and they were cursing themselves because they didn't understand the historical and cultural background of their own faith. And I realized that I'd been blessed by God with a knowledge of ancient Hebrew and other ancient languages, and particularly an understanding of ancient Jewish texts. And I realized then and there that I needed to share that information with people who need that information and want to receive it. And that's why one of the main reasons I do what I do, that I go around and I speak to Christian and other types of New Testament believing groups around the world, because I realize that if I were in their shoes, I would want somebody to help me out who had that information and want them to share it. And so I feel compelled to share it. So I don't have some secret, agenda to convert people, not to Judaism and not to Christianity. My position is, I think the people coming to hear me, they have their own personal faith, and they can decide on matters of faith themselves. But if they have a faith, whatever that is, they should know what they believe and know what the historical and cultural origins of that are. And if you say, yeah, Jesus was a Jew, and we want to live the life of a Jew like he did, well, you need to distinguish between what he was doing 2,000 years ago and things that he was actually opposed to, or things that were added into Judaism in opposition to him. I mean, it's utterly ridiculous. I mean, it's tragic. It really is, that a group of people would be cursing themselves, not realizing that Jesus never prayed that prayer, because that was written against his people.
Would
his
it be
followers.
inappropriate to ask what that 19th benediction or whatever it was?
Oh, it's called Birkat Minim, which literally means the blessing of the heretics, because the rabbis looked...
The blessing of the heretics.
That's what it means.
Bless the heretics.
And it's not a blessing on them, it's a curse upon them. It's a blessing on God for destroying them and uprooting them. And the heretics the rabbis are referring to, the Minim, are the Jewish followers of Yeshua. That's, look into the Jewish Encyclopedia, it'll tell you that.
Wow.
And it's mentioned in the Talmud.
Well, obviously, the process that we've been in has been interesting. And I did want to do one thing, if it would be okay, because once again, you all invited us back to talk a little bit about what's happened since. And I don't know, Al, again, I have to go back to what you talked about. You really challenged us. But I'm always reminded of why it is that we're together. And really why it is that we're together is that we've been called to this, the Word of God. And of course, I told a little bit of the story before, and it's also in our book. Hopefully people will take a chance, get a chance to get the book and go to a prayer to our Father. And it's here at GLC, in the GLC bookstore. So I would love for folks to come to the GLC bookstore and get this book. But this book, I call it a calling card, literally. A calling card to the congregations, a calling card to the Messianic fellowships, a calling card to the Jewish synagogues, a calling card to countries and people around the world to find the common ground of being able to get into the understanding of what this prayer is. And I have to go back, if I can, back to 2002, because in 2002, you know, I went to Israel, and you guys have gone there. I think it's your 25th time. You just got back from Israel. I'd love to go with you the next time you go. But when I was there in 2002, there were three things that happened to me. The first thing that happened to me is I understood that I wasn't in what I call God's time. There was time that was different that God saw versus the time that I was going by, and so
It was empty of tourists too.
it was empty of tourists, absolutely. So I went to celebrate Shavuot. Now, what's interesting about being on GLC right now is we're just about to Shavuot, what in Christian terms would be Pentecost. So I'm invited to be in Israel at the time of Shavuot, Pentecost. Christians and Jews agree on that, which is a wonderful thing. So while I'm there, I have this passion to want to have a Torah scroll. Now, I want to share what I didn't get to share last time when I was on GLC, is that while I was there, I got a chance to actually own a Torah scroll. And if you know anything about that, as a Gentile, I probably wouldn't be able to get one if it was kosher, and of course, I couldn't afford one if I got a new one. And through a number of circumstances, I was able to actually obtain a Torah scroll. And what I'd like to do... A complete Torah scroll, and I got my friend Nehemia Gordon, who didn't know he was going to be my friend, to teach me how to read the Torah scroll. Now, the reason I want to show this Torah scroll here on GLC is there's something important that I want Nehemia to read on the front of this Torah scroll that are in Hebrew letters. Would you read that for us?
Yeah, it says on the front cover, and actually when I came to see this Torah scroll in Jerusalem, I think you hadn't even noticed this, and because I was assuming this was some kind of little fake Torah scroll, the kind you buy in a gift shop for
Made in China,
like $10 or $20. Yeah. And I look at this, and it's obviously an ancient scroll, and it's got this beautiful velvet cover, and it says on the front cover a verse from Isaiah chapter 2. It's a verse talking about the nations, the Gentiles, coming from all over the world to receive the word of God, and it says, "Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah u'devar Yehovah miYerushalayim." For the Torah shall go forth from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And that's so amazing, because I think Keith is a fulfillment of that prophecy, and not just Keith, but I'm seeing people from all over the world coming to Jerusalem and wanting the word of God, returning and saying, what we've been given and what we've received, we want to understand the origins of that. And we know that in our Bible we have this Old Testament. We want to understand the context of that, and the context for the Christians of what Jesus taught in its historical context.
Well, what's so powerful about that Torah scroll and our visit here back to GLC, and what I believe is a call, again, to folks that are out there that are listening, is that there was three things that happened to me. One, being there for Shavuot. Two, the Torah scroll. And the third thing, which we'll talk a little bit more in the second half, has to do with the name of God. Well, what was so exciting about my friend Nehemia, we were in the place that you guys had us stay last night, and on the front of the place that we stay is this big, huge slab of what? The Ten Commandments. Now, when we were here last time, I noticed that. I took pictures of it. When we came this time, I looked at the front and I thought, oh, it's not there. I pull up, and sure enough, it's there. And I have to tell you all, when I see that, I am reminded of what I've been given. Not just the Ten Commandments, but the actual Word of God, that we can actually live, we can actually love it, we can actually learn it. And so for me, here we are about to be at Shavuot. And what about Shavuot? Happens to be the time when the people ended up being at the mountain. And as that they were at the mountain, what did our Father in heaven do? The first thing he did was he introduced himself. He said, Anochi Yehovah Eloheka. I am Yehovah, your singular God. And what does he do then? He gives them these commandments. And I am personally excited, because I think the timing of what's happening around the world, that we are now getting closer and closer into his time, God's time. And it isn't the same as the time that we've learned traditionally. So for me, what I have to just tell you again, thank you for having us here, because here we are about to be at the time of Shavuot, which was the time that I was actually called to Jerusalem, where I get this Torah scroll. And I have to say one little thing about it is that I actually went to Jerusalem with the vision of getting this Torah scroll. So what I did was I brought an empty suitcase. I called it my Ark of the Covenant. And sure enough, I get there, and it happens to be an Arab man, happened to be a Palestinian Christian, an Arab man who helps me get to a Jewish man's house. So here you have an African-American man, an Arab man being brought to a Jewish man's house who's out of town in Greece. He has a white South African man watching his house. So here it is, Arab man, black man, white man from South Africa going into a Jewish man's apartment, and there are these three Torah scrolls. The one I chose wasn't based on the Hebrew on the front. It was based on the fact that I thought it would fit into my empty suitcase. And what happened, I just have to tell this story. Can I just tell this?
Please.
So here I is. I'm going to meet this guy, Nehemia Gordon, who's supposed to be the Hebrew scholar. And I'm thinking, okay, he's going to take me on a tour. I don't care about the tour. I want him to read my Torah scroll. This is where it gets exciting. So I've got this Torah scroll. We get into the apartment. Nehemia finally agrees to come and see the Torah scroll. The Torah scroll opens up. Nehemia begins to read in perfect Hebrew. I began to listen in perfect English, which means I didn't know what he was saying. Come to find out, as we open the Torah scroll, he's reading. I say, Nehemia, what are you reading? He says, well, I'm here reading the passage in Leviticus chapter 23 about the holiday of Shavuot.
Really?
This is what happened. So here you have a guy who's called to Jerusalem during the time of Shavuot. He wants a Torah scroll. I get one. When I get the Torah scroll, I ask the Jewish man to help me read it. The scroll opens up. There are no chapters. There are no verses. I don't know how to read the Torah scroll, though I must say now I do know how to read it.
He sure does.
The Torah scroll opens up, and my Jewish friend reads the passage about Shavuot. Now, at that point, I made one decision. You and I are going to be friends. You know what he said? No, we're not. No, Nehemia, you and I are going to be friends. This is prophetic. We're going to give a chance to teach people and to tell people. He's like, no, it'll never work. I'm Jewish. You're Christian. I'm white. You're, wait, I don't know what he said back then. But the point was there were too many differences.
Don't you see?
Don't you see? Didn't you understand? In fact, today, at the hotel, we're both wearing the same T-shirt. It says, don't mess with Texas. And I asked the maintenance man to help me get in my room. He came downstairs and he said, I couldn't remember what you looked like. I didn't know who it was. We're starting to look like each other is my point. But my point is this. I really believe that there is something, one little piece of prophetic fulfillment that's taking place with Nehemia and me. And so my challenge to my brothers and sisters who maybe still are a little stuck with the spirit of Martin Luther is to get over it. Because you know what? God's going to have his way. His will shall be done. And as long as you keep saying yes, and I keep saying yes, and GLC keeps saying yes, and all of us keep saying yes, Father, whatever you have for us, we want to love you with our whole heart. We want to love you with our whole mind. We want to love you with our me'od, which means the very part of us inside. If we keep saying that, I'm telling you, we're rushing towards redemption.
How can it be any other way if we're going to be grafted in?
Okay.
And you don't know when this program's going to play, but I do. When this program airs, it's just after sundown on...
Don't you say that.
Yes, it is.
You're telling me you're going to air this on Shavuot? I feel like blowing the shofar again.
On the eve of it.
Really?
At sundown.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
Now, is that God or is that God?
I think it is. And again, I just
You know
have
what's
to...
even more miracle?
Huh.
I looked that up this morning, just walking out, I thought, it's got to be close. And this will air on the 18th, you see.
Okay. Wow. Well, I just have to say, I think both of us would say we're honored because we don't take this as a small opportunity.
No,
This
you
is
can't.
no small thing that you all would invite us to come back. I mean, we don't fit into the boxes that I think a lot of people would like us to fit in.
Welcome to GLC.
I have to say, I told Tommy this. You know, when I come here, it literally feels like a bit of a sanctuary. Just safety in here. And I think it's a powerful ministry that you all have. And I hope that we can be of support to you as you continue to do this. And anything we can do, we want to do to support you. And we thank you for bringing us in.
Can I read this prophecy here from Isaiah chapter 2 that was on the front cover of his, you know, because we read just part of one verse, but if you read the whole context, it's a really powerful prophecy. I'll translate just here from the Hebrew. It says, and it shall come to pass in the latter days, or the end of days, this is Isaiah chapter 2, verse 2, the mountain of the house of Jehovah shall be set up and shall above the mountains and shall be lifted up from the hills, and all the nations shall flow to it. And the word there actually for flow in Hebrew, naharu, is literally the river. They will river to it. They're going to flow like a rushing river. And it says in verse 3, and many nations shall go, and they shall say, let us go up, and let us go and ascend to the house of Jehovah, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us from his ways, and then we will walk in his paths. And the word there for teach, yorenu, that's from the same root as Torah. So it really is, may he Torah us from his ways. For the Torah shall go forth from Zion and the word of Jehovah from Jerusalem. And what I'm seeing around the world is that this prophecy is beginning to be fulfilled. Now the prophecy goes on, and the rest of it is well known. You know, they'll beat the swords into plowshares. Well, we know that hasn't happened yet. We've got lots of wars going on in the world. So the end of the prophecy hasn't just about come about yet. But the beginning, it's beginning to happen. It's starting to happen. People from all over the world are awakening. Something is happening. You know, we've been to 5 countries now. Well, Israel, okay, we know what's happening there. But 4 countries outside of Israel where people are being awakened, and we get emails from all around the world. We have people visiting the website to learn about the Hebrew origins of the Lord's Prayer from over 100 countries. I don't even remember how many countries. We've had people visit the website from Saudi Arabia. You can actually see where they're coming from. People from all over the world. All over the world. Saudi Arabia.
Well, they'd get their heads chopped off.
They would get, yeah, if they found out what they were looking at on the web, they'd be put to death. But there's people from all over the world who are coming and have this inexplicable interest. They're not supposed to be interested in this topic. I mean, people from Mozambique, all over, looking and investigating, trying to find out about the Hebrew origins of the Lord's Prayer. And, you know, we just see this happening.
Well, it's interesting. I'll just tell you one other thing is that Nehemia actually did come up with 2 rules when we started. And because what he had heard was that I was going to try to convert him. And so he called me up and he said, listen, if you and I are going to be friends based on this Torah scroll and we're going to study together, I only have 2 rules. First rule, I don't try to convert you. You don't try to convert me. I said, no problem. Second rule, we're only going to study the Tanakh, the Old Testament. I said, no problem. Now, most people would have really challenged me on that. Well, Keith, why would you do that? You're studying what's under the law, and why would you not bring him to the New Testament? He's the one that called me on the phone after a couple years and says, I'd like to suspend one of the rules. Now, what do you think I'm thinking at that point? He's going to suspend.
He wants to be Jesus.
Amen. I'm thinking 4 spiritual laws. Instead, he calls up and he says, Keith, I want to suspend the rule about the New Testament because I've been given access to some manuscripts in Hebrew Matthew. And I have to tell you, I am most excited that that was the rule that we suspended. And as a result of that, he and I have been able to take the same approach in terms of how I'd learned Hebrew in the Tanakh and take that same approach to the New Testament. So we've done a study of the entire Hebrew Matthew. The prayer is what we call the gift. It's the gift that we want to give to people. It's common for people. And I just have to say again, Nehemia, how much of an honor it's been for a brother to come and say, okay, look, we don't agree on everything. And there's some things we just absolutely don't agree on. But the things that we do agree on have to be at the Word of God. And then as a result, we didn't say, let's go write a book. We studied together and thought, this is too good, we have to share it. And really, it's only been a year, just under a year, and literally people around the world have taken this gift and learned it. So it's been a blessing.
Don't agree on everything, but you have to agree on the Word.
Absolutely.
Is that what you just said?
Well, what he's saying is that we have the word in common. And, you know, I'm kind of used to that as a Jew. There's a saying, old saying, that if you ask 2 Jews, you get 3 opinions. And
they're like economists?
They're worse. Well, the economists are Jews.
Okay.
They're worse. My cousin is a Jewish economist, so I'm allowed to say that. You know, I mean, it's very common in Judaism for us to, you know, to have these disagreements on things, and as long as we can love each other and agree on the basics, then we can interact with each other, and, you know, as long as we're treating each other with respect. And that's really the basis of my relationship with Keith. We're treating each other with mutual respect and finding our common ground on the Word of God, on the Tanakh.
Which is included in the New Testament now.
It's part of it, huh? It's
Exactly.
It's a package deal. Well, this has been an exciting hour. Well, Keith Johnson, Nehemia Gordon, thank you. You're going to stick around, and they're going to be right back with us in the next segment, right? And we're going to talk some more. You guys got a lot more stuff to.
We're saving the interesting stuff for the second half.
Okay, well,
That was the introduction.
That was the introduction? Yeah. Well, a couple of great guys with great haircuts, so yeah. All right, we'll be right back, and thanks for sticking with us.